Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. If you don't know me, my name is Justin, and today we have a very special video going through my full AMCAS application. I did black some things out for privacy reasons, but I kept it as transparent as possible. I remember watching a lot of these videos before I applied, so hopefully you find it helpful as well. And without further ado, let's get into it. So this first page here is pretty self-explanatory. At the top of the screen you can see my submission date, which was June 3rd, 2022, a few days after the application opened, and my process date was 6/27/2022, which was 24 days later. This is why it's so important to submit your application early, because it takes AMCAS a while to verify everything in your application before you can continue on with things like secondaries. We start off with some basic identifying information, including your name, date of birth, birthplace, and citizenship status. I was born in the Philippines, but have U.S. citizenship, so I'm not considered an international applicant. There are a lot of schools, mainly public schools, that don't even accept international applicants, so that application process can become a lot harder. Next, we have some blacked out contact information and some biographical information where you can mark your racial self-identification, where I marked Asian and more specifically Filipino. You can also mark any additional languages you speak. I have self-reported a level of FAIR for Tagalog, which hopefully isn't too much of a stretch. Some more basic information. This is also the part of the application where you can self-identify as underserved. If you choose to do so, there is an additional essay where you can further explain your situation. Moving on here, AMCAS did mark me as an SES disadvantaged student. I don't really know the process for this, but I also don't know how large of a role it plays. Here we have some sibling information where my two sisters make an appearance, and I also marked no on these additional questions because I've never matriculated to any other medical school, and I do not have any other felonies. Okay, so moving on to my academic record, I was part of an engineering technology program through my high school and got some college credit for that. Nothing too serious though. Getting my transcript from the community college was such a headache because I didn't know my student number or anything, but we figured it out. I majored in bioengineering at the University of Toledo, so we took some pretty tough courses. Let's see if we can hit some of the highlights. Also, I chose bioengineering just because I didn't know if I wanted to pursue medical school yet. But here, my freshman year, I decided to retake Calculus 1 even though I scored a 5 on the AP exam. And considering that I failed my first exam in that class, it was probably a pretty good idea. I was the type of student in high school that waited to the last minute to do everything, so this was my wake-up call to stop procrastinating. I also had to quickly learn how to study, and something I discovered when studying for finals was that practice questions were my go-to method and how I learned best. And even though I didn't know it at the time, this was basically my go-to method for studying for the rest of college. I am a lot better at problem solving compared to rote memorization, so I enjoyed classes like calculus compared to things like biology. So whenever people ask me why I chose such a hard major that risked getting a bad GPA, I honestly don't agree with that because I think I would have done better in engineering courses compared to upper level biology classes anyway. So we have some of the basic gen chems here. Oh, I decided to take Physics 2 the summer between my freshman and sophomore years just to get a little ahead. I also got credit for undergraduate research this summer through a program through the Undergraduate Research Office. I ended up getting paid, which was a bonus considering I didn't get paid for any other research throughout college. OChems 1 and 2, those were fun. Not really. BioE computer application. So virtually everyone in my major hates MATLAB, and this was one of the courses that was really MATLAB heavy, so everyone hated this class. Multicultural Toledo was a class through the Honors College. I'm from the Toledo area, but I got to see the city from a different perspective, so that was really awesome. This was also when COVID started, so sadly that class got cut short. So these co-op experiences are full-time internships, and the reason it took me 5 years to graduate. The engineering program at Toledo requires 3 co-ops, meaning you have a full year of industry experience before you even graduate. I'll get into exactly what I did a bit later. And here we have the hardest course of my whole college experience, Biotransport Phenomena, which is a fluid dynamics class that focuses on fluids within the body. Yes, it was as bad as it sounds, but that brings us to the future, or current and future classes. These were the courses which I was scheduled for when I submitted my application. So overall, that was a pretty straightforward part of the application process. Make sure you're using your official transcript to input your classes and that you're inputting the name exactly as it appears, because this is what AMCAS is going to use to verify your application. This brings us into the total GPA, where we have 127 hours at a 4.0. Let me reiterate that you do not need perfect stats to get into medical school. I talk about that more in my other video. My grades definitely did play a big role in my competitiveness, but there are other parts in the application process that we'll get into later that also helped me stand out. So here's my MCAS score. I scored a 520, which puts me in the 97th percentile. I did score the lowest in cars, and let's be real, everyone hates cars, so that was expected. I don't really have any awesome advice for the MCAT that isn't already out there. I mainly use Kaplan, Anki, UWorld. I did use some blueprint exams, and also the AMC material is a must for the MCAT. And now we have my preview score here, which was the situational judgment test new to the application this year. It's pretty similar to Casper, but everything's multiple choice. There's a review PDF on the AMC's website that I can link below. I got a 7, which is the 93rd percentile. I'm pretty sure schools were just using the score to collect data and weren't using it for any huge role in decision making. Okay, so now we're getting into the extracurriculars and activities section. So I remember watching videos just like this to see how other people were approaching it. There are different schools of thought when it comes to writing. Some people say to keep it short and sweet. Some people are really big into storytelling, and there are other people who would like to just bullet point things. There really isn't a right way to do it. Ultimately, it just depends on whoever's reading your application and what they prefer. Personally, I like telling stories and sharing my experiences through that kind of lens, so let's take a deeper look into this. This first activity here is my time as medical scribe for a general surgeon. Looking back, this definitely was the most meaningful activity for me, but at the time that I submitted it, my application, I only had 4 months under my belt. Most of the patients we saw were people who had gallstones or hernias, but we also saw many patients with what is called a hiatal hernia, and this is when their stomach comes through their diaphragm and into their chest. It can cause things like acid reflux and chest tightness with larger meals. The doctor I worked for was one of the best in the business when it came to repairing these, so it was really cool working with him. So next here we have a publication I was listed second author for. I was pretty heavily involved in the project all the way in the beginning with model design and also in the end with data analysis and writing our findings. We basically used finite element modeling to model the spine, which had either undergone anterior cervical realignment or pedicle subtraction osteotomy, and we compared the forces on the spine in those two situations. So feel free to look at the paper if you're curious. This next experience here is my time as a research assistant for the Engineering Center for Orthopedic Research Excellence, where I also did some time as a co-op. This was the lab where I was able to publish that paper I was talking about earlier, and I named it as one of my most meaningful activities as I found sort of a bridge between engineering and medicine, and I'm definitely still interested in pursuing something like that in the medical school. And here we have some community service with an organization called Food for Thought. We basically just handed out PB&J lunches to those in need, and it was pretty awesome to be part of this event, especially after COVID, because everything else that I was a part of was basically just online. Next, we have my time as a president and founder of the Society of Asian Scientists and Engineers. Funny story, at the career fair my sophomore year, and asked my co-op director if there were any other career fairs that I could attend. And she told me to reach out to the Latino Engineering Student Association, and it would have been a great idea if I was Latino. So I ended up bringing the Society of Asian Scientists and Engineers to campus to give Asian heritage students a place where they could find mentors in terms of networking, portfolio building, and just professional development. I also briefly worked as a peer mentor through the school in my junior year. This was the first year that freshmen were coming into college during a pandemic, so hopefully I helped them out a little bit. I also did some pretty basic clinic volunteering where I scanned in paperwork and stuff, but I also got to work as a patient transporter whenever necessary. But as you can see here, I didn't do it for too long just because I didn't enjoy it as much as some of my other activities. Now this was another one of my most meaningful activities, not only in this application process, but in my entire life. My time as a volunteer at that neighborhood free health clinic was when I first started making long-term relationships with patients and connecting with the community in a really meaningful way. I saw how big of an impact inequitable access to healthcare could have on someone's life, and it was really refreshing to see healthcare professionals volunteering their time to make a difference. Here we have some basic position shadowing, and of course, we had to put weightlifting on the application. It was brought up a lot, and at the end of the day, the person reading your application wants to know who you are as a person, and hobbies are a great way to show that. I was tempted to categorize it as powerlifting, but I've never competed, so I didn't want to feel like a fraud. Also, here's the infamous typo I found after submitting my application. Forgot the I in happier, but it's fine and we survived. I would be lying if I said that it didn't bother me for months. This was another highlight of my college experience. I've choreographed traditional dances like Tinikling and Muggalatik. If I can find some videos, I'll put them on screen right now. There were so many times where I'd have to stay up late and study for a class because we'd been rehearsing for hours prior to that, but there's no other feeling than being on stage and performing. So this is the research that I conducted between my freshman and sophomore years, which I got undergraduate research credit for. I had no idea what I was getting into when I signed up for it. I had no prior lab experience. I have never taken biochemistry, but thankfully the people in this lab were so patient with me and helped me kind of figure out what I was doing, and I ended up presenting at an undergraduate research symposium later that summer. I was a presidential scholar, which is how I had the full academic scholarship, and I also served on the selections committee for that, so I got a taste of how hard it was to choose between so many qualified candidates. And this last activity here definitely has a special place in my heart. The Filipino American Association taught me so much about myself, my culture, and I learned how to be proud of my self-identity, and also came into my own as a student leader. I found my second family here, and my college experience definitely would not be the same without it. So overall, I did some basic pre-med things, but I also explored my interests outside of that through things like engineering research and also choreographing traditional Filipino dances, which has nothing to do with medicine. And I think that's really important to do. After all, being a pre-med shouldn't be your whole entire life. And that brings us to the personal statement, which I have decided to black out because of some personal things. I did recently see a TED Talk video about the rise of trauma in the college application process, and honestly it applies a lot to the medical school application process as well. So definitely don't talk about trauma just for the sake of talking about trauma, but if it is part of your story of why you want to become a doctor, don't shy away from it. So another big part of my personal statement was wanting to find a connection between medicine and bioengineering. Throughout a lot of my co-ops and research experiences, I've seen that doctors have a really big role in terms of pushing medical innovation forward, so I want to take on a similar role in the future. I guess my only cliche advice for you guys is to stay true to yourself and show and not tell why medicine. I know it's really basic advice, but... So I did have 7 letters of recommendation. Each school is going to be different in terms of their requirements for these letters. Some schools want just people who have taught you in classes. Some schools are fine with people outside of classes through things like extracurriculars. So definitely just do your research on that. Being an engineering major kind of complicated things because some schools require science letters but don't consider engineering classes science classes, so we had to kind of figure that out. And the last thing here is my school list. I go over that in my other video as well, so feel free to check that out or just pause the video if you're curious now. So yeah, that was mostly my whole AMCAS application. If you guys liked the video, please like and subscribe, and as always, stay tuned for more content. See you guys next time.